It's a great pleasure, of course, to be here. I have to express, firstly, my total admiration for the early start of this conference, which indicates the third sector, with its 45,000 organisations in Scotland, get up early in the morning because there's a great deal of business to transact. Not only are there the 45,000 organisations, but 130,000 employees and more than a million volunteers. All of these organisations, all of the organisations represented here, are integral and fundamental to the well-being of communities across the country. I hope that the new website, the Get Involved, which has just been launched, will enable even more people to benefit from your services and encourage even more volunteers to get involved. Now, the Scottish Government, hugely values the work that you do, often in partnership, and I want to stress this theme of partnership. That work in alleviating poverty and helping to reform public services, creating employment opportunities, and of course setting up successful social enterprises. And it's that theme of partnership which will percolate through this speech, this address today. Now, I should say your achievements are achieving international recognition. John Swinney this week, or just a few days ago, spoke at the third conference on social enterprise in Norway. And here in Scotland, of course, and particularly if you're of my political persuasion, we often see countries such as Norway as providing an example that we can learn from. I've been watching the cooking programme in Scandinavia, which has been broadcast on a Sunday. I don't know how many of you have been watching it, but it provides not just an insight into Scandinavian cuisine, but also the social structures across the Scandinavian countries. But we often see countries such as Norway in creating their successful drive to create a fairer society as an example, an exemplar that Scotland should follow. So it's striking that in Norway, during the conference, in the third conference, they hugely admire the strength of social enterprise and the third sector here in Scotland. And John Swinney, as Finance Secretary, was very struck by firstly the knowledge and the welcome and the admiration that they had for the work of social enterprises in Scotland. So the overwhelming message I want to get across this morning is that the Scottish Government shares not just a partnership, but a common cause with the third sector. To give one example just, our focus on prevention, that is to say shifting public service investment so we support people before major problems arise, that would be impossible without the work of the third sector. We want to see inclusion decision-making, to involve you in providing and reforming public services, but above all to work with you to build a fairer and most prosperous country. And we want it to be understood that this nation will prosper because we'll become a fairer society. And that's why we provide support and encouragement to an extent which is quite different from the attitudes in the other Parliament in this island to the south of us. It's not simply about funding. You've seen over the last year how the Scottish Government has worked with the third sector to express shared concerns about the UK Government's lobbying bill. We don't want a bill to reduce or limit the contribution that you make to policy making in Scotland, or indeed the essential role that you play in holding politicians, including this politician, all politicians, to account. And in emphasising that point of common cause this morning, I want to argue a fundamental point, that the Scottish Government and the third sector, in my estimation, would work together even more effectively in an independent Scotland. I want to start by making a contrast on the debate on welfare at Westminster and in Scotland. I was delayed for a few minutes, not just by being in Good Morning Scotland, but by checking the totally extraordinary article that many of you won't have read because it's in the Daily Telegraph this morning from the Prime Minister David Cameron. But I wanted to have a look at the article just to make sure that what was being reported was actually what the Prime Minister had written. This is a reply to Archbishop Vincent Nichols, soon to be Cardinal of England, about to be installed this week, who, as you know, made some scathing criticisms of the UK Government's welfare reforms. And in reply this morning in the Daily Telegraph, David Cameron claims that the benefit cuts are, as he puts it, a moral mission. which is giving new hope to the poor and the unemployed. Now, the reason I wanted to check that is because, having heard it reported, it's one of these moments where you check the calendar to see if it's April the 1st. It is the most extraordinary thing. You know, we've got a debate at Westminster which is driven by language where people are described as strivers or skivers, shirkers or workers. But of course, the reality is, as every organisation in the third sector dealing with these issues knows, society is not divided between skivers and strivers, one group who pay in and another group who take out. Everyone contributes to society in different ways at different times, and everyone needs public support in different ways at different times. Now, I reflect on that because it's one of the reasons I've been so determined in Scotland to ensure that some services are universally available: tuition fees, prescriptions, care for the elderly, and most recently, of course, thanks to the campaigning work of a number of organisations represented in this gathering, the coming introduction of school meals for children in primaries 1 to 3. Universalism, the social wage as I call it, recognises that everyone in society deserves and benefits from public support and shared security. It creates a sense of common endeavour, of cohesiveness, and that cohesiveness both makes it easier to justify additional help for the most vulnerable and harder, of course, to remove vital safety nets. Just before Christmas, I visited the food bank in Gilmerton in southeast Edinburgh. It is operated by the Trussell Trust, who get me packing boxes along with the volunteers there. They were all doing a fantastic job. Now, any thinking person, any human being who visits a food bank finds himself in two minds. On the one hand, admiration for the volunteers who commit their time to express solidarity with those in need. On the other hand, concern and anger that 21st century Scotland, we need food banks at all. We reflect on the Prime Minister's moral mission. Well, there is a moral mission. In food banks, the moral mission is from the volunteers and the solidarity that's being expressed. But I didn't feel that the people who were required to use the services of food banks felt that their lot was being substantially improved by the government's austerity programme. I didn't feel they were part of a helpful programme to improve their livelihoods. Now, the Trust told me that in 2011 they operated one food bank in Scotland. They now have 43. It's been estimated almost 50,000 people in Scotland have used them in the last 9 months. The rise in food banks is part of a pattern. Academic analysis has found that in terms of disparities in earnings, the UK has become the fourth most unequal nation on earth in the OECD, the developed world. Not much of a moral mission in that damning statistic. By next year, the UK government's welfare cuts will reduce household incomes in Scotland by a total of almost £2,000 million a year. We are now in the extraordinary position, the totally extraordinary position of seeing the reversal of the gains made in combating child poverty between the inception of the Scottish Parliament. Since the inception of the Scottish Parliament, thanks in part to a number of the policies pursued by that Parliament, and I'm talking about the Parliament as a whole, the number of children living in relative poverty in Scotland has halved from 300,000 to 150,000 since the Parliament was established. However, we have now a range of organisations, including the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the Child Poverty Action Group, are predicting that numbers of children in relative poverty are likely to increase by tens of thousands between now and 2020 as part and as a consequence of the welfare reforms. Not much of a moral mission there. And these cuts so far are just the beginning. George Osborne said at the start of the year that a future Conservative government would implement further cuts of £25,000 million, with welfare accounting for almost half of these cuts. And that's without counting the specifically targeted cuts in Scotland's budget, up to £4 billion of them, which could be enacted at Westminster by scrapping the Barnett formula if there were a no vote in the referendum. It's worth remembering that Scotland has paid more tax per head of population for the rest of the UK for each and every one of the last 32 years. At present, the expenditure on social protection is a smaller proportion of those revenues in Scotland than the rest of the UK, 38% against 42%. I would submit that indicates the resources are there to provide decent social protection. What's lacking at the moment, of course, is the powers to enable these resources to be put to that work. However, with additional power needs to come also an additional and different attitude. A glaring example of this is the bedroom tax. 2 weeks ago, the Scottish Parliament voted to set aside £35 million in this year's budget to help mitigate the acts of the bedroom tax, its impact. In the latest in a string of measures to mitigate the impact of UK cuts. As a result of that action, nobody need face eviction this year purely as a result of the bedroom tax. Now that's good, that's great, but we should be absolutely clear about what it means. We haven't abolished the bedroom tax in Scotland because the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the power to abolish the bedroom tax. And of course it's worth asking, why should we be forced to establish a framework of measures to cancel out the consequences of policy which virtually nobody in Scotland wanted in the first place? Wouldn't it be simpler just to have control of our own welfare policies in the first place? Even more fundamentally, how we got to the point that in energy-rich, resource-rich, people-rich, talent-rich Scotland, 50,000 people are using food banks. Tens of thousands more children might grow up in poverty by the end of the decade. Why are we part of one of the most unequal societies in the developed world? Or as Margaret Lynch, Chief Executive of Citizens Advice Scotland, asked the Scottish Parliament's Welfare Committee last year, quote, "How is it possible that in 21st century Scotland, in an advanced capitalist society, that we are having to give our volunteers suicide awareness training because the welfare state is being ripped asunder?" When David Cameron came to office, the big society was his big idea. But his policies aren't creating a big society, they're creating a shrinking society. And the third sector is being asked to provide a sticking plaster for the scars of austerity, to be the public sector's replacement, not its partner. And there's a huge difference between the third sector being mobilised as a replacement to try and cover over the wounds of the welfare programme than being a partner to bring improvements across society. Now, my submission is in Scotland, it shouldn't be this way, and it doesn't have to be this way. On the 18th of September, all of us will get an opportunity to shape a different future. Now, let me be clear, I don't expect the organisations in this room to express a clear view on either side in the referendum debate. You represent employees, volunteers, work with individuals who, of course, hold diverse views on Scotland's future. I understand totally and respect that completely. However, the next 6 months do give us a unique opportunity to reflect on the sort of country we wish to create, the Scotland we want to see. And you can add your voices to that wider debate and contribute your views on how best we can create a fairer and more prosperous country. Many of you, of course, are already helping to lead the debate in communities about Scotland's future. It's frequently a more vigorous and constructive debate than sometimes the one constructed and conducted in the media. And that's hugely important. After all, many of the people you work with feel excluded from the normal, the orthodox democratic process. They may not vote. They may be bored by politicians. Many people are. Even I, occasionally, in the Scottish Parliament, move into an atmosphere where I'm not totally excited by everything that's being said in that forum. But this year, Scotland's future is in the hands of all the people. It's in the hands of every part of society, and everybody has one vote in the referendum. And if you can encourage as many people as possible to take an interest in participating in the debate, the most important opportunity Scotland has had in 3 centuries, it will be a huge service to democracy and to society. Now, in November, Scotland's Future set out the government's vision for independent Scotland. Scotland's Future answers important questions for the third sector. It explains that big lottery will continue to operate, tax relief will be maintained. It makes it clear that charities registered in England, Wales and Ireland will continue to operate in Scotland, just as charities registered in Scotland will continue to operate elsewhere in these islands. But Scotland's future also emphasises that one of the first and most exciting tasks of a newly independent country will be to create a new inclusive constitution. And it's inconceivable that the third sector wouldn't play an important part in that process. But Scotland's future does more than answer specific questions and outline the processes of constitution making. They are very, very important things, of course. But it also sets out a picture of the sort of Scotland we could create with the powers of independence, one where social justice goes hand in hand with economic prosperity, where we value social protection as investment in people rather than attacking it as a burden on the state, that the true moral purpose is an investment in human potential. The Council of Economic Advisers of the Scottish Government has been much in the news of late. One of its members, of course, is the Nobel laureate economist Professor Joseph Stiglitz. In a very, very important book last year, The Price of Inequality, Joe Stiglitz argues persuasively that making the poor poorer makes all of society poorer. And so we shouldn't just argue for a change in direction out of morality, although we certainly should, or out of social cohesiveness, although we certainly should, but out of enlightened self-interest, which recognises the economic imperative of having a fairer society. In about an hour's time or so, the latest labour market stats will come out, the figures on employment and unemployment. Over the last few months, unemployment has been declining, employment has been rising in Scotland, impressive growths in employment, particularly employment among women. But joblessness among young people is still stubbornly high. It is actually, in terms of employment, the most pernicious problem, attacking the very roots of society. Now, I know that Angela Constance is speaking here later this morning. She's the only youth employment minister in the whole of Europe. Her post was created as part of a crusade here in Scotland, one which has included the third sector, the private sector, and all arms of the public sector to ensure that tough economic times don't create a lost generation of young people as they did before in the memory of many of us here. Now, our powers on employment are limited. We don't have the range of fiscal powers, spending powers to promote growth. We can't ensure, for example, that work pays. And by that I mean we don't have the power to promote a living wage and ensure that the minimum wage increases at least in line with inflation year by year. But there have been notable successes, despite the fact there's still a huge amount to do. And the organisations represented here under the SCVO banner, however, have played a major role in these successes. The Community Jobs Scotland Fund has created more than 4,000 opportunities since it started in 2011. I understand Emma Scott, the 4,000th start in the Community Jobs Scotland Fund, will be receiving a certificate from Angela Constance later on this morning. And therefore, I'm delighted to announce to this gathering that we'll be allocating an additional £4 million to fund Phase 4 of the Community Jobs Scotland programme. That will allow the third sector to deliver up to 1,200 further job opportunities for young people across all of the 32 local authority areas of Scotland. Now, these 1,200 opportunities will include 100 which are specifically for people with disabilities or long-term health conditions. 200 will be part of a pilot programme for youngsters with a troubled background. Now, I think it's worth contrasting that approach to the initiatives run by the UK government, such as the Work Programme. The Work Programme is unpaid, often mandatory, provides no guarantees that the young person will be kept on. Community Jobs Scotland, in contrast, is a genuine job opportunity for at least 6 months with training and support provided. In a recent evaluation, 94% of employers were positive about the Community Jobs Scotland programme. In its second year, the proportion of young people entering a positive destination, that is going on to employment or to college or university education, was almost 70%. The comparable figure for the UK Work Programme is between 10 and 15%. And the Work Programme uses threats based on coercion. The approach of the Community Jobs Fund delivers opportunities through partnership. That is a shared social investment that will benefit society and our economy for many decades to come. Now, childcare is a further example of social investment. Later today, the Children and Young People Act goes through its stage 3 proceedings in the Scottish Parliament. That Act enables us to increase the care and learning provided for 3- and 4-year-olds to 600 hours a year. From August 2015, that care will also be available to 27% of 2-year-olds across Scotland. Now, the third sector is crucial to the development of our policies on childcare and will be crucial, of course, to delivering these policies. That's why we've established an early intervention fund for the third sector. Working together, we've made significant progress on childcare. But although we can improve childcare under devolution, I believe we can only achieve a transformational change with independence. Independence allows us to reduce spending in areas such as defence, to decline to finance the madness of a new Trident missile programme, and that will allow us to fund learning and care for 50% of 2-year-olds, not 27% in the first budget of an independent Scotland. But secondly, and most importantly, only independence will allow us to benefit from the success of these policies. We've led a sustained drive to increase employment among women over the last 18 months. Our female participation rate in the labour market is now higher than any other country in the UK, having increased by 3 percentage points over the year. That's 60,000 women working now more than were working a year ago on the last employment statistics. And these jobs are by vast majority, incidentally, full-time jobs on the statistics. Using 2012 figures, giving female participation in the workforce up to the same levels as they have in Sweden would require a further increase of 6 percentage points or so. The scale of that increase would generate £700 million of tax revenues through the range of taxes, through income tax, national insurance, VAT, the range of taxes. That generates £700 million if you can achieve the same participation rates as they have in Sweden at the present moment. And I think that's possible, incidentally, because if you look at male employment in Sweden and Scotland, they're virtually identical. And there's no other reason that I can think of why there's still a disparity in female participation in the workforce beyond the key reason of people being able to afford it through the provision of universal childcare. The problem is, under current arrangements, the overwhelming bulk of that £700 million goes straight to the UK Treasury in London. And I see absolutely no sign whatsoever, if we look at George Osborne's conduct over the last week, or indeed his conduct over his entire political career, that the very first thing in his mind, if he received that additional £700 million in tax revenue from additional participation in working for the women of Scotland, would be to say, my first priority is to give that to the Scottish Parliament to help fund their ambitions on childcare. I see no inclination on his part that that is what he would do. It's the difference between having the ability to retain the revenue from the success of policies, from a transformation that makes childcare in Scotland affordable. It also makes it sustainable. With devolution, we bear the financial cost of social investment. With independence, we receive the benefit of that social investment. And the same applies, of course, to youth employment. The investments we make with you as partners are crucial, but the revenues from the success, from the people who get into work, flow back to Westminster. We should be able to fund further expansions in initiatives like the Community Jobs Scotland programme as a result of these successes and these initiatives. So in conclusion, employment and childcare are examples of the sort of Scotland that we're trying to build, one where the public sector, the third sector, the private sector are engaged in this common cause, investing in people, in human capital, to create a sustainable, fair and prosperous society. Too often at present, in my submission, we're working against a grain of policies decided elsewhere, ones that have led to huge imbalances between different parts of these islands, growing levels of inequality, welfare cuts which harm the most vulnerable in society. That is the choice on the 18th September. It's one of two futures. With a no-vote, decisions will continue to get taken for us. Our ability to act will be an ability to mitigate the mistakes that are made elsewhere. If a yes vote is the outcome, our future will be taken into our own hands. We can therefore build the Scotland that most of us want to see. And that is the simple the overwhelming truth at the heart of the case for independence, that the best people to make decisions about Scotland's future are the people who live and work in Scotland. That's not an argument that's subject to statistical manipulation. It's not an argument for one day's headlines. It's not an argument born of fear. It's a common sense position based on experience and confidence in the ability that we have collectively as a society. That's why this 18th September, I believe the people of Scotland will choose independence, because doing so provides us with the powers we need, not just to create a wealthier country, but to create a fairer society, a real moral mission for Scotland. Thank you very much.